Okay, so this news broke shortly after we recorded with Sam last week that the Stronach Group is basically putting a ticking clock on the lifespan of Gulfstream Park. Now there's a bill that the Stronach Group wants the Florida Horsemen to support, which is a decoupling bill, which basically means that they'll separate the casino and the racetrack at Gulfstream Park, where currently, in order for the casino to exist, they have to conduct live racing on the premises, and going forward, they would split that up so that supposedly that they can attract more redevelopment opportunities and investors on the non-racetrack portion and probably eventually on the racetrack portion. Even if the Florida Horsemen support this decoupling bill, the Stronach Group and Keith Brackpool, who was like their special advisor that came to shout at the Florida Horsemen, said that he can only guarantee racing at Gulfstream until 2028. So, in my opinion, it's like, you get fucking lost. Like, you want us to support this decoupling, and then you're only going to guarantee racing for another couple of years. But Jon has a unique perspective on this because he was on the Florida Horsemen's board. So I'll just hand it over to him. Jon, just tell us about some of the background for this fight, and then just your impression and experience.
Yeah, and Joe, let me take you a couple of steps back, before that, because when the vote came out from the board, and again, I resigned recently from the board for a multitude of reasons, but one of which was because I wanted to focus more on the podcast. I wanted to focus more on some other businesses, but also because it was very frustrating dealing with management. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But go back with me for a minute. Last year, the Florida Horsemen pulled together and got onto a group policy for workman's comp. And that was a huge savings for a lot of trainers. It was a very positive thing. Unfortunately, they had like 6 or 7 claims, one of which was catastrophic, where an exercise rider is still in the hospital, unable to walk. And because of those claims, the workman's comp company announced 60 days prior to the anniversary date of the policy, the renewal date, that they were not going to renew the policy. So that put a lot of trainers in harm's way. Basically, if they don't have workman's comp insurance, they can't train horses on the racetrack. The majority of racetracks mandate that they have some kind of proof of workman's comp insurance for the safety of the employees. I mean, that makes sense. Most businesses have to do that. So in the negotiation with management as to, what percentage of the money horsemen we're going to try to get out of the casinos and things like that, management took it upon themselves to say, hey, trainers, we will take the class of employees known as exercise riders off of your policy and put it into our group policy, because we can stomach it. We have enough other employees, enough other people on there where it won't affect our workman's comp. And you will be able to get renewal of insurance. And Joe, that was literally like 2 days before the deadline at that point, when management came in and allowed that. They also offered $500,000 towards the retirement fund for horses, because there's about 30 or so horses in a herd that Florida Horsemen are paying for right now in 2 different states. So that helped a lot. And that was basically it. And in exchange for that, they wanted us to vote that not for decoupling, but they wanted us to vote that we wouldn't stand in their way if they went to Tallahassee to decouple. And I know it's a nuance, but it's very important nuance, because we weren't voting for decoupling. We were voting to allow management. We were going to stand in their way, basically. And at that point, because the horsemen had a gun to their head, in essence, for workman's comp purposes, they accepted the deal. Now, fast forward now from that point a couple of months, and all of a sudden, Brackpool and management is coming out and saying things like, well, we're only giving a 3-year commitment for racing. Well, that was never discussed prior to that. Well, now, we're talking in good faith with our advisors in Tallahassee, and basically we're going to give you a flat amount of what's going to come, regardless if we get additional slots, additional machines, additional table games. Well, that wasn't really nuanced or discussed. And so from the horseman standpoint, they were left kind of over a barrel. They didn't have any other options with regard to the workman's comp. They had to continue it, otherwise they couldn't race. They couldn't continue their livelihood. And unfortunately, things have only gotten worse since then. And the only options that Florida horsemen have at this point are to either not enter horses and basically strike, which is almost an impossibility for horsemen to band together and do something, especially because it's their livelihood.
Right.
Or pivot and look for other alternatives outside of Gulfstream. Because even though Brackpool et al. Now is coming out and saying, we're guaranteeing you 3 years, they've also said on the other side of their mouth, we can pull the plug on this at any time. And we don't need your permission to shut down. That was an actual quote from Brackpool. We don't need your permission to shut down. Well, if that doesn't send, shivers down your spine as somebody who races in Florida, I don't know what does. He's basically telling you that for all intents and purposes, we are going to do the same thing at Gulfstream that First has done in Maryland and in California, and that's revisit how much our land is worth. In this case, $500 million. Some people are saying $1 billion. Who knows? But hundreds of millions of dollars. And look at it and say, if we're only making a small percentage on revenue from the gaming at this point, but we can get a shit ton amount of money. That's actually a legal term, a shit ton amount of money for our real estate. Then why wouldn't we do that? And Joe, I actually can't blame them. I can't. They bought, Stronach family bought Gulfstream for $95 million. I know they put tens of millions, if not more, into the facility itself. But if they could walk away with, $500, $600, $700 million for it and not have to deal with the nonsense of everything that's going on in racing these days, and the person, Brackpool, who is, has a real estate background, is the one that has Belinda's ear right now, I can see them doing that. I can see them doing that before 3 years. I have more to talk about, but I'd love to hear your comments so far on what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good story in the TDN by Dan Ross about this meeting, and the first thing that struck me was that this sounded a lot like Craig Fravel's olive branch to the Northern California horsemen, which was basically like, do what we say or we're going to shut you down.
Right. And
the fact that, like you said, he said we can close down whenever we want to. Like, I don't know, man. Like, this has been a family business. Like, it sucks that Frank is no longer in charge, just because I know there's like a lot going around about what Frank.
But he loved racing.
Did.
He loved racing.
That's what I'm getting at, is that whatever other things that he's potentially done and is guilty of, he loved racing, and racing was the focus of that company. And now they could give a shit. It seems like they could give a shit, and that's that to me, that's laid very bare in the way that Keith Brackpool and Craig Fravel are approaching these discussions. Like, basically, our way or the highway, get in line or get the fuck out of here. Right. And that's, to me, like, even if there's some kind of deal struck where Gulfstream is allowed to race like beyond 2028, like, to me, that does not bode well for the future of the game at Gulfstream or at Santa Anita. And I think that there is a legitimate possibility in a world where 5 years from now, neither of those tracks exists. And that's a real scary thing for the business. That, that to me, those are the two biggest dominoes to fall, to where you eventually only have racing in Kentucky and I guess New York. Mm-hmm. And this is a major issue. And I feel terrible for the Florida horsemen, because I feel like they got to feel like they're being jerked around right now. By the same token, like, I get what you're saying, that it is very, very valuable land, but like, no one put a gun to Frank Stronach's head and said, you have to buy this land. Like, this was an investment in racing and in Gulfstream for years and years and years. And now, like, it just isn't. And it's an afterthought. And it's a really unfortunate thing. And the other thing that I you mentioned that, like, the deal, if the horsemen supported the decoupling, the details guaranteed in writing from Brackpool and the Stronach Group to the horsemen said that TSG would continue to pay the current share of revenues from the casino into the purse account. Like, oh wow, thanks. You're just going to keep it up from the casino, because the casino's not going anywhere. Right. That TSG would pick up a large part of the state horsemen and women's workers comp premiums. That's significant. And they agreed to donate a significant amount of handle to the aftercare program. But just looking into the numbers. It says the annual slice of casino revenues to purses is reportedly around 6.2 million. That's not a whole hell of a lot for an entire year of racing. And the additional monies that TSG offered would increase the amount to $7.5 million annually. That to me seems like.
And Joe, just interrupt for a second. The $7.5 million is also the exact same amount that they're getting from the state for purses. So basically, what they're giving is nothing. They're basically saying, we're going to give you we're getting $7.5 million from the state for structure improvements. We're going to take your $7.5 million that's for purses, and we're going to give it to you for purses. Well, wait a second. The state gave that to us already. Well, that was basically all they were giving us, with regard. But again, Joe, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just
go ahead.
It got me very frustrated because there's not a lot that the horsemen can do other than those couple of things: pivot, look for something else, or not enter horses. And they're not willing to do the latter. As far as now, there is a lot of talk. There's been a lot of talk since these meetings with Brackpool, where a lot of significant, prominent horsemen and owners, especially, are starting to get together and saying, what other options do we have? Is it Palmettos, which probably isn't an option because there's noise ordinances as far as not being allowed to to have working hours past certain times or on weekends. There's Tampa, which is owned privately. There's OBS, which has a mile racetrack and also has parimutuel licenses. And Palmetto, we mentioned Palmetto, and then there's the wild card of just starting from scratch somewhere else, which again could take years and years and years. But what it is doing, the only thing that's warming my heart is the fact that there is a lot of chatter, and I mean a lot of chatter among well-heeled owners that own real estate that want to see racing continue. And they're looking for options, and they're looking to band together. So at least then it's not on the collective backs of trainers. And again, the trainers on boards are in a very bad situation, Joe, because they, on the one hand, they have to try to play ball and negotiate with management. And then like that afternoon, go to the racing office and say, hey, can you write this race for my horse? Or, hey, can you make sure that this maiden race goes? Or there's a leak in the roof. Can you it puts them in a really shitty situation. So going forward, I hope that horsemen's boards are not just 75% trainers or 2/3 trainers, but actually people who don't have to make their livelihood at the racetrack, and have the ability to negotiate in good faith with management on certain things. Because the way that the boards are set up right now, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that they're not going to be able to win negotiations with management when they have a stacked deck anyway. And I'll tell you something else. The other thing that Stronach has that's going in their favor is the fact that 3 years ago or 3+ years ago, Steve Screnchy was the Horsemen's president, and he's an attorney and he's a smart guy. Well, after negotiation with them, they hired him to work for them now. And he is in management's, upper management for First. So not only is he a smart guy and a good, adversary, but he wrote the rules basically for the horsemen and knows the rules as an attorney and as an individual, and doesn't make his bones. If his horses can't run a Gulfstream, it's not like he's going to lose his house or anything like that. So, you're up against it. From the rule standpoint, you're up against it because they have better people negotiating, and you're up against it because you have a ragtag group of people that aren't willing to band together and fight the system. And I get it. I understand why. But maybe this was a good wake-up call for everybody to say, we always assumed that Gulfstream was going to be there, and Gulfstream was going to be one of the pillars of the racing circuit for horsemen. Maybe it's good to know now that in reality, they don't have they don't have racing as their number one priority. If it wasn't for, the Pegasus, and we can talk about whether or not the Pegasus should be $3 million or $1 million at this point, based on the horses that go there. That's another topic. But if it wasn't for the fact that Belinda loves to have a party on that day and spend millions of dollars in security and entertainment and food and everything, so she can show off for that one day, I don't think she would give a shit about Gulfstream racing at all. That's just my opinion.
No, I mean, that's plainly obvious from the actions of the company. And, Yeah, I mean, I agree with your point that the horsemen are in between a rock and a hard place. Like they have to work with management, but they also have to stand up for themselves and each other
Right.
in situations like this. And yeah, it's a great point you make. Like there's a lot of very wealthy people in this business, a lot of very well connected people in this business. Like it's time for some of them. It's easy for me to say it's not my money, but it's time for some of them, I think, to step up and band together and actually do something proactive and significant to keep racing at some of these places. Because like look at Arlington Park. How long ago did they knock that down?
Right.
3.5 years ago.
Yep.
They haven't built a single fucking acre of redeveloped property on that acreage right now. And it's like I guess there's going to be something there long term. Like they're in discussions with the Chicago Bears seemingly endlessly to put a stadium there. But like I just feel like so many of these companies are like, just knock it down, get rid of it. We'll come up with something more profitable to take its place. And it's I don't know. It's really unfortunate. I'm getting pretty sick of people who have no interest in racing controlling 95% of the racing product in this country. And it's a major problem. And I think that we need some people with a lot of capital to step up and push back against it.
And Joe, one more thing, and then we can go to the next topic. So about how long has HISA been in place? A year and a half?
A couple of years. The ADMC has been in place since like mid 2022.
Okay. So back before they actually implemented it, you and I sat down and we talked about, dog racing. And I actually have those notes. As silly as it sounds, because I'm a hoarder. So tell me, if I didn't say this was dog racing, I said this was horse racing. Here are the way that dog racing ultimately went under. Decentralized power base, performance enhancing drug epidemic, unregulated industry, funded primarily from parimutuel wagering, annual reduction of athlete population, nonprofit groups protesting, lack of adequate aftercare programs, tracks closing, high takeout rates, costs outpacing economic gains, lack of genetic diversity, both in people and athletes, decoupling. If I didn't have dog racing written on the top of this, I could just as easily cross out dog and put thoroughbred racing, and it's the same set of issues. Now, we're getting better because of HISA. We're getting better because of some of the regulatory benefits that we have, especially in Kentucky, as far as...
That might go away in June.
That might go away in June. Exactly. So my point is like, look at the writing. Look at the writing on the wall, or literally on my piece of paper from 2 years ago when you and I sat down. These are thoughts that you and I put together about dog racing and how it compared to horse racing. And there's still a lot of them. There's still too many of them that are following the pattern of dog racing, which is now no longer part of the industry, no longer part of it's not in existence anymore. Well, I don't want our industry to befall that same fate as dog racing is. But at the end of the day, you look at the scorecard and it's eerily similar, Joe.
Yeah, I remember us talking about that and whether or not that was a harbinger of what's to come for horse racing. And I'm so glad you kept those notes. Like, you're right. That is like down to a T, the same issues we have. And yeah, I hope we can find a solution in California and in Florida and basically pull up stakes and tell the Stronach Group to, take a long walk off a short pier. I mean, basically, like when I read these stories, it's like the quotes might as well be, "Nice racetrack you have here. Be ashamed if something happened to it."
Exactly. It's exactly right. That's exactly right.